Yellow just walking in the house in my road, gotta make her put it on. She don't like wearing clothes, just left Concord, North Carolina. I was licking on booty in a whole lot of vagina. Eat a boozer with some ice cream, she'll remember you. Ice Cube make it chip, shiver like the winter do.
See me with the crew, I done get some food. I see you looking like you do. Had to make a move,
yeah, doing clap things like groupies. I feel like Biggie and that Koji. I know his beats sound notorious. Yo, my homies Brooklyn get a cheesecake. Let's go.
What's up, y'all? It's Nate Almighty, aka the Global Dark Skin Ambassador. And I got this article here from the website prisonpolicy.org, and they have the eight myths about mass incarceration. Now, especially for my fellow black people, y'all know we have our views about what mass incarceration is, what contributes to mass incarceration, who are the power head figures behind mass incarceration. So what I want to do is I want to read all 8 of these myths and get my take on it. And I also want to know what you guys' opinion of this is, also within the comments. But here's the thing. You know what I notice about y'all niggas? What I notice about y'all? When I talk about the more scientific stuff, the more logical stuff, I be getting less views, man. So what I need you to do is go ahead, like this video, share this video. I want this type of information to reach more people, not just the violent gang-related stories. I want to get into, the meat and potatoes of it all. But without further ado, let's get to the prisonpolicy.org's 8 myths about mass incarceration. Let's get to it. The first myth. Private prisons are the corrupt heart of mass incarceration. In fact, less than 8% of all incarcerated people are held in private prisons. The vast majority are in publicly owned prisons and jails. Some states have more people in private prisons than others, of course, and the industry has lobbied to maintain high levels of incarceration. But private prisons are essentially a parasite on the massive publicly owned system, not the root of it. Nevertheless, a range of private industries and even some public agencies continue to profit from mass incarceration. Many city and county jails rent space to other agencies, including state prison systems, the U.S. Marshal Service, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. Private companies are frequently granted contracts to operate prison food and health services, often so bad they result in major lawsuits. And prison and jail telecom and commissary functions have spawned multi-billion-dollar private industries by privatizing services like phone calls, medical care, and commissary. Prisons and jails are unloading the cost of incarceration onto incarcerated people and their families, trimming their budgets at an unconscionable social cost. They basically saying here that private prisons aren't the heart of mass incarceration, but they saying that they are at the same time. They saying that, what everyone thinks mass incarceration is because of the prison industrial complex, where a whole bunch of people, just like in hip hop, they say that there was a meeting when hip hop was getting big, and they said, hey, listen, we're gonna have a whole bunch of leaders, future leaders within hip hop, to come together and say, listen, we could all make money off private prisons if we get a whole bunch of people incarcerated, right? They basically saying that they not at the heart of it, but they still play a major role. Basically, that's what they're saying. Myth number 2. Prisons are factories behind fences that exist to provide companies with a huge slave labor force. You see, before I even read that, I'm going to say that they're saying that's a myth, but I was in prison. They are doing this. They are factories behind fences that exist to provide companies with huge slave labor force. That's all prison is. All your job is a form of prison labor, slave labor. But anyways, get into it. Simply put, private companies using prison labor are not what stands in the way of ending mass incarceration, nor are they the source of most prison jobs. Allegedly, I'm saying allegedly, only about 5,000 people in prison, less than 1%, are employed by private companies through the federal PIECP program, which requires them to pay at least minimum wage before deductions. A larger portion work for state-owned correctional industries, which pay much less, but this still only represents about 6% of people incarcerated in state prisons. But prisons do rely on the labor of incarcerated people for food service, laundry, and other operations, and they pay incarcerated workers unconscionably low wages. Our 2017 study found that on average, incarcerated people earn between 86 cents and $3.45 a day for the most common prison jobs. In at least 5 states, those jobs pay nothing at all. Moreover, work in prison is compulsory with little regulation or oversight, and incarcerated workers have few rights and protections. These are facts. If they refuse to work, incarcerated people face disciplinary action. For those who do work, the paltry wages they receive often go right back to prison, which charges them for basic necessities like medical visits and hygiene items. Yeah, like I remember being in prison, there's something like a surcharge where even though you ain't want to go to court, even though you ain't want to have a court case, even though you ain't want to go to trial, nothing like that, they charge you with something that's called a surcharge, right? And this surcharge got to be paid off before you can even get any real commissary, right? This is how they giving it up. They giving it up filthy. They giving up real filthy. Forcing people to work for low or no pay and no benefits while charging them for necessities allows prisons to shift the cost of incarceration to incarcerated people, hiding the true cost of running prisons from most Americans. That's what I'm saying. Like, they put you in the prison you don't want to be in, and then they charge you for being there, and they make you work. They make you work for 86 to $3.45 a day. These are facts. Like, I had a job. I was only getting like $1 a day, for real. But the third myth, releasing nonviolent drug offenders would end mass incarceration. It's true that police, prosecutors, and judges continue to punish people harshly for nothing more than drug possession. Drug offenses still account for the incarceration of almost 400,000 people, and drug convictions remain a defining feature of the federal prison system. Police still make over 1 million drug possession arrests each year, many of which lead to prison sentences. Drug arrests continue to give residents of over-policed communities criminal records, hurting their employment prospects and increasing the likelihood of longer sentences for any future offenses. Nevertheless, 4 out of 5 people in prison or jail are locked up for something other than a drug offense, either a more serious offense or an even less serious one. To end mass incarceration, we will have to change how our society and our criminal legal system responds to crimes more serious than drug possession. We must also stop incarcerating people for behaviors that are even more benign. I agree. Moving on to the fourth myth. By definition, violent crime involves physical harm. They say this is a myth. The distinction between violent and non-violent crime means less than you might think. In fact, these terms are so widely misused that they are generally unhelpful in a policy context. In the public discourse about crime, people typically use violent and non-violent as substitutes for serious versus non-serious criminal acts. That alone is a fallacy. But worse, these terms are also used as coded, often racialized language to label individuals as inherently dangerous versus non-dangerous. In reality, state and federal laws apply the term violent to a surprisingly wide range of criminal acts, including many that don't involve any physical harm. In some states, purse snatching, manufacturing methamphetamines, and stealing drugs are considered violent crimes. Burglary is generally considered a property crime, but an array of state and federal laws classify burglary as a violent crime in certain situations, such as when it occurs at night in a residence or with a weapon present. So even if the building was unoccupied, someone convicted of burglary could be punished for a violent crime and end up with a long prison sentence and violent record. The common misunderstanding of what violent crime refers to, a legal distinction that often has little to do with actual or intended harm, is one of the main barriers to meaningful criminal justice reform. Reactionary responses to the idea of violent crime often lead policymakers to categorically exclude from reforms people convicted of legally violent crimes. But over 40% of people in prison and jail are therefore offenses classified as violent. So these caveats end up gutting the impact of otherwise well-crafted policies, as we and many others have explained before. Cutting incarceration rates to anything near international norms will be impossible without changing how we respond to violent crime. To start, we have to be clearer about what that loaded term really means. Yes, it's just a whole lot of fancy mumbo jumbo. And for the most part, the blacker you are, the more violent they want your charge to look like. I'm just saying. Moving on to number 5, the fifth myth. People in prison for violent or sexual crimes are too dangerous to be released. I mean, it depends, man. If you locked up for doing crazy things to women, you should probably do a significant amount of time and a significant amount of prison mandatory therapy before they even give you a chance. Certain violent crimes, I think they gotta evaluate your history. You deserve more of a chance off that than, doing heinous things to women, especially children. It's a little bit crazy, but of course, many people convicted of violent offenses have caused serious harm to others, but how does the criminal legal system determine the risk that they pose to their communities? Again, the answer is too often we judge them by their offense type, rather than we evaluate their individual circumstances. This reflects the particularly harmful myth that people who commit violent or actual crimes are incapable of rehabilitation and thus warrant many decades or even a lifetime of punishment. Yeah, I think it all depends, As lawmakers and the public increasingly agree that past policies have led to unnecessary incarceration, it's time to consider policy changes that go beyond the low-hanging fruit of non-nons. People convicted of non-violent, non-serious, non-actual offenses. Again, if we are serious about ending mass incarceration, we will have to change our responses to more serious and violent crime. Right? Myth number 6, crime victims support long prison sentences. Policymakers, judges, and prosecutors often invoke the name of victims to justify long sentences for violent offenses, but contrary to popular narrative, most victims of violence want violence prevention, not incarceration. Harsh sentences don't deter violent crime, and many victims believe that incarceration can make people more likely to engage in crime, and I agree. National survey data show that most victims support violence prevention, social investment, and alternatives to incarceration that address the root causes of crime, not more investment in carceral systems that cause more harm. This suggests that they care more about the health and safety of their communities than they do about retribution. Right. Myth number 7. Some people need to go to jail to get treatment and services. That's weird, because that definitely shouldn't even have to be an option. But it's absolutely true that people ensnared in the criminal legal system have a lot of unmet needs. But we shouldn't misconstrue the services offered in jails and prisons as reasons to lock people up. Local jails especially are filled with people who need medical care and social services, but jails have repeatedly failed to provide these services. Many people end up cycling in and out of jail without ever receiving the help they need. People with mental health problems are often put in solitary confinement, have limited access to counseling, and are left unmonitored due to constant staffing shortages. The result? Suicide is the lead cause of death in local jails. Given this track record, building new mental health jails to respond to decades of disinvestment in community-based services is particularly alarming. Similarly, while 2/3 of people in jail have substance use disorders, jails consistently fail to provide adequate treatment. A tiny fraction of all jails provide medication-assisted treatment for opioid use disorder, the gold standard for care. That means that rather than providing drug treatment, jails more often interrupt drug treatment by cutting patients off from their medications. Between 2000 and 2018, the number of people who died of intoxication while in jail increased to almost 400%. Typically, these individuals die within just 1 day of admission. Jails are not safe detox facilities, nor are they capable of providing the therapeutic environment people require for long-term recovery and healing. And the reason why this goes on is because we talking about big pharma and everything. They're not in the business of people being cured of the addictions that they have to these many different drugs and many different pills and all these things. That would end them. So of course they gotta interrupt. But moving on to number 8, expanding community supervision is the best way to reduce incarceration. The 8th myth. Community supervision, which includes probation, parole, and pretrial supervision, is often seen as lenient punishment or as an ideal alternative to incarceration. But while remaining in the community is certainly preferable to being locked up, the conditions imposed on those under supervision are often so restrictive that they set people up to fail. I agree. It's like they always tell you, like, let's say for instance you young, you just getting into crime and you get locked up and they give you 5 years probation. They always tell you that you get into probation because they hoping that you violate probation, come back, and now they gotta give you time, and then you come home and you still on parole or supervised parole. That's how they do it. That's how they do it, man. The conditions imposed on those under supervision are often so restrictive that they set people up to fail. Numerous and burdensome requirements and constant surveillance, especially with electronic monitoring, result in frequent failures, often for minor infractions like breaking curfew or failing to pay unaffordable supervision fees. This is what I'm saying. Like, curfew is what? Like, if anything, you should have a curfew unless you have a job. Like, if you show that you could maintain a job while you on parole or probation, it shouldn't be no curfew. Shouldn't be no curfew. Like, come on now, we grown. We grown. Are you talking about a kid that's 16 or older on probation? Come on now. The freaks don't even come out until 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. So you want somebody in their house by 7, 8 o'clock? Come on now. Nobody's following that. In 2019, at least 153,000 people were incarcerated for non-criminal violations of probation or parole, often called technical violations. Probation, in particular, leads to unnecessary incarceration until it's reformed to support and reward success rather than detect mistakes. It is not a reliable alternative. It's a fact. That's why I said it should be rewards. If you stay out of trouble for 6 months, you should get a reward for that. They should decrease some of your time. If you get a job, it shouldn't be no curfew, and they should decrease some of your time, you know what I'm saying? But it's because they want to keep people hooked, chained, and sinker, you know what I'm saying? But those were the 8 myths about incarceration. Like I said, man, if you made it to the end of this video, thank you. I appreciate you. Hit the like button. Share this so this can hit the algorithm, man. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Peace.